I know the scent of betrayal. After 35 years of marriage, I don't need to check text messages or look for lipstick on collars. I recognize the signs immediately. The late nights at the office, the suddenly password-protected phone, the emotional distance that crept in like a winter draft. Thomas thought he was being careful this time, but he forgot one crucial detail. I'd seen this performance before, the moment I found the emails. I didn't cry or scream as I had 20 years earlier. Instead, I calmly took screenshots, backed them up to my private cloud storage, and closed his laptop exactly as I'd found it. My hands didn't even shake. That's when I realized how much I had changed and how little he had. My name is Rebecca Patterson. I'm 58 years old, CEO of my own financial consulting firm, mother of 2 grown children, and wife to a man who has now betrayed me twice in our 35-year marriage. The first time nearly destroyed me. This time I was ready. 20 years ago, I was a different woman. Rebecca Patterson, 38. Stay-at-home mom with a part-time bookkeeping job, financially dependent on my husband Thomas, a rising star at his engineering firm. Our children. Michael and Sarah were 13 and 10. I had devoted my entire adult life to supporting Thomas's career and raising our family. I discovered the first affair by accident. Thomas had forgotten his phone at home, and when it kept buzzing with notifications, I checked to see if it was something important from work. Instead, I found dozens of intimate messages between him and Melissa Carter, a new project manager at his company, messages describing encounters in her apartment, plans for their next meeting, and even discussions about a potential future together. My world collapsed. I still remember sitting on our bedroom floor phone, clutched in my trembling hands, unable to breathe through the panic attack that followed. When Thomas came home that night, I confronted him immediately, still in my bathrobe, though it was 7 p.m. Eyes swollen from hours of crying. "Who is Melissa?" I had asked, my voice barely a whisper. Thomas's face. The immediate shock followed by denial, anger. And finally, when I showed him the phone, resignation, told me everything before he spoke a word. What followed was a nightmare of painful confessions, tears, recriminations, and eventually, couples therapy. Thomas swore it was over. He begged for forgiveness, promised it would never happen again, said it was just a mistake, and didn't mean anything. For the sake of our children. For the nearly 2 decades we had already invested in our marriage, I chose to believe him. "I'll never hurt you like this again," he had promised. Holding my hands across our therapist's coffee table. "I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you." The rebuilding process was agonizing. For months I checked his phone, his email, his whereabouts. I lost 20 pounds from stress. I couldn't sleep without medication, but gradually, painfully, we reconstructed something that resembled our marriage. Thomas was attentive, transparent, remorseful. He switched departments to avoid working with Melissa. He came home early, took me on dates, reconnected with the kids, and I changed too. The affair had shattered my illusion of security, showing me how vulnerable I was, as a woman who had sacrificed her career for her family. So while rebuilding our marriage, I also rebuilt myself. I went back to school, earned my MBA, and started working full-time in financial planning. Eventually, I launched my own consulting business, which grew successful enough to rival Thomas's income. "You're a force of nature," my best friend Sophia told me 5 years after the affair, watching me close, a major client deal over lunch. "You've completely transformed." I had to. I replied, I promised myself that if there was ever a next time, I wouldn't just survive, I would thrive. I meant those words, though, as the years passed and our marriage strengthened. I truly believed there wouldn't be a next time. Our children graduated from college, started their own careers and relationships. Thomas and I traveled, entertained, planned for retirement. We were by all appearances a success story, the couple who had weathered infidelity and emerged stronger. Until 3 months ago, when I noticed the signs beginning again, it started with subtle changes. Thomas began spending more evenings at work. His phone would go silent when I entered the room. He became overly attentive to his appearance. A new haircut, expensive cologne, shopping for designer clothes for the first time in years. Small things, each with a plausible explanation, but together forming a pattern I recognized all too well. Am I being paranoid? I asked Sophia over coffee one morning. Sophia, now a successful corporate attorney and divorced herself, had been my rock during the first affair. Trust your instincts, she said, stirring her latte with precision. What does your gut tell you? That history is repeating itself, I admitted, but I need to be sure. And if you're right, what then? I took a long sip of my coffee before answering. Then I keep the promise I made to myself 20 years ago. That evening, I waited until Thomas was in the shower to check his laptop. He had grown careless again, a classic pattern with serial cheaters. They get away with it once, and it creates a sense of invulnerability. I found the emails within minutes. Catherine Lawson, marketing director. Based on their exchanges, the affair had been going on for at least 2 months. As I stared at the evidence of my husband's second betrayal, I felt a curious detachment, as if I were observing someone else's marriage crumbling. The pain was there, buried deep, but it was overshadowed by something stronger: resolve. I closed the laptop and went to bed, lying awake beside my sleeping husband, planning my next steps with the same methodical approach I used for complex financial strategies at work. The next morning, I called Nicholas Chen, a private investigator recommended by a client who had gone through a difficult divorce. I need documentation, I told him during our first meeting in a nondescript coffee shop 20 miles from my home. Comprehensive, irrefutable evidence. Nicholas, a former police detective with thoughtful eyes and a methodical manner, nodded. Most clients come to me for confirmation, not evidence. You seem very certain. I am certain, I replied, but 20 years ago I was blindsided by emotion. This time I want to approach this strategically. Over the next 3 weeks, Nicholas provided me with exactly what I needed: photographs, video recordings, timestamps, credit card receipts, documenting hotel stays, and gifts. I reviewed each piece of evidence with clinical detachment, organizing everything into a digital folder labeled Insurance. My next call was to Alexandra Morgan, widely regarded as the most formidable divorce attorney in Seattle. I want to understand my options. I explained during our first consultation, I'm not rushing into anything, but I need to be prepared. Alexandra, a stylish woman in her 50s with a reputation for ruthless efficiency, nodded appreciatively. Most clients come to me in the middle of a crisis, making emotional decisions they later regret. You're being smart. For 2 hours, we discussed Washington State's community property laws, the valuation of my business, our shared assets, and potential settlement scenarios. I took detailed notes, just as I would in a business meeting. Your financial independence gives you leverage, Alexandra noted. What are your primary objectives if you decide to proceed with divorce? I considered carefully. Fairness, not revenge. I want my business protected completely. It's my creation, built after his first affair. I want an equitable division of our other assets, and I want to maintain relationships with our children without forcing them to take sides. Alexandra smiled. Reasonable goals make for cleaner negotiations. Have you considered where you would live if you separate? I hadn't, but the question triggered something in me. Our house in Bellevue, though beautiful, was filled with memories, both good and painful. It held the ghost of our younger selves, including the devastated woman I had been during the first affair. The following week, I quietly contacted a realtor and viewed several properties. I settled on a modern waterfront cottage on Whidbey Island, bright, peaceful, with stunning views of Puget Sound. Using funds from my personal savings, maintained separately since I started my business, I made an offer. It was accepted within days. All of this, the investigation, the legal consultation, even the house purchase, I kept completely private. At home, I maintained our normal routine. I attended dinner parties with Thomas, discussed retirement plans, even planned a vacation for our upcoming anniversary. I was playing a role, but it didn't feel like lying. It felt like self-preservation. 6 weeks after discovering the emails with Nicholas's investigation, complete, my legal options understood, and my private financial matters in order, I was ready for the confrontation. I chose a Sunday morning when we had no plans, no potential interruptions. "We need to talk," I said, setting a cup of coffee in front of Thomas at our kitchen table. The normality of the scene, sunlight streaming through windows, the smell of freshly brewed coffee. The Sunday paper untouched between us belied the magnitude of what was about to happen. Thomas looked up from his phone, mildly curious. "About what?" "About Catherine Lawson." His face underwent the same transformation it had 20 years earlier. Shock, then attempted confusion, then dawning realization that he had been caught. But this time there was also a flicker of something else. Relief, perhaps. As if he had been waiting for this moment. "Becca, I can explain." I held up my hand, stopping him. "Before you speak, I want you to know that I have everything. Emails, photos, hotel receipts, times, dates, locations. I've known for weeks. Thomas, I've had time to consider my response very carefully." His expression shifted again, the relief vanishing, replaced by wariness. This was not the same confrontation as before. I wasn't crying or shouting, I was calm, controlled. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "First, I want you to understand what's going to happen," I said, opening a folder containing printouts of Alexandra's notes. "I've consulted with a divorce attorney, given Washington's community property laws and the documentation I have of your infidelity. Here's what a court would likely award me." I slid the summary sheet toward him. Thomas scanned the document, his face paling. "This is almost everything we have. Actually, it's a fair division. My business remains wholly mine as it was established with my separate funds after your first affair. The house, retirement accounts, investments. Those would be divided equally. You keep your personal assets. I keep mine." "You've been planning this," he said, a note of accusation in his voice. "Yes, just as you've been planning your affair with Catherine. The difference is, I'm being honest about it now." Thomas pushed the paper away, running his hands through his salt and pepper hair, the same gesture he'd made 20 years ago when confronted with evidence of Melissa. "It just happened, Becca. It didn't mean anything. That's exactly what you said last time." I noted word for word. "I still love you," he insisted. "We can work through this like before. Go back to therapy. Start over." I studied him across the table. This man I had loved since college, the father of my children, my partner through decades of life. In his eyes I saw genuine regret, but also calculation. He was assessing his options, looking for the path of least resistance. He expected tears, anger, then eventual forgiveness. The same pattern as before. "No, Thomas," I said quietly. "We're not going to therapy this time. We're not starting over. You made a choice, the same choice you made 20 years ago, despite seeing what it did to me, to our family. You don't get a third chance. You're just angry. You don't mean that." His tone was gentle, patronizing, the voice he used when he thought I was being emotional rather than rational. "I'm not angry," I replied evenly. "I'm finished. Here are your options. We can proceed with the divorce using the settlement terms I've outlined, fair, equitable, and private. Or you can contest it, in which case all the evidence I've gathered becomes part of the public record, accessible to our friends, colleagues, and family." His face flushed. "You're threatening me." "I'm offering you a choice," I corrected. "The same courtesy you never extended to me when you chose to cheat. Twice." Thomas stood abruptly, pacing the kitchen. "This isn't like you, Becca. You're being cold, calculating." "No, I'm being rational. There's a difference." I remained seated watching him. 20 years ago, I thought our marriage was worth saving at any cost. I was wrong. It cost me my self-respect, my peace of mind, and apparently it didn't even work. So that's it. 35 years just over. You ended our marriage the moment you started seeing Catherine. I said, I'm just finalizing the paperwork. He stopped pacing, leaning against the counter. For a long moment he was silent, and I could almost see him processing his limited options. Thomas was many things. Brilliant engineer, charming host serial cheater, but he was also pragmatic. What about the kids? He asked. Finally, Michael and Sarah are adults. They'll be hurt and disappointed, but they'll understand I won't speak ill of you to them. But I won't lie if they ask direct questions. You've thought of everything, he said bitterly. I had to. You left me no choice. Thomas sank back into his chair, defeated. When did you become so hard? The question stung more than I expected. Not because it was cruel, but because it revealed how little he understood me, even after all these years. I'm not hard. Thomas, I'm strong. There's a difference. I closed the folder and stood. I'll be staying at Sophia's for a few days while you decide what you want to do. The settlement offer expires in 1 week. After that, we proceed to litigation. As I walked out of the kitchen, he called after me. Where did we go wrong, Becca? When did we lose each other? I paused in the doorway, not turning around. We lost each other 20 years ago. Thomas, we just pretended otherwise. Sophia welcomed me with open arms, a bottle of expensive wine and no judgment. How do you feel? She asked that evening as we sat on her balcony overlooking Lake Washington. I considered the question, watching the light fade over the water. Sad, relieved, proud, angry. All of it in waves. That's normal, she assured me. When my divorce was finalized, I cried all morning and then went out dancing that night. Emotions aren't linear. I keep thinking about what he said, that I've become hard. I sipped my wine, letting the rich Cabernet warm me against the evening chill. Maybe he's right, Sophia snorted. Typical, when a man is ruthless in business, he's strategic. When a woman protects herself from being exploited, she's hard. I don't want to be bitter, I admitted. I don't want this to define me. It won't, Sophia said firmly. Look at everything you've built: your business, your relationship with your kids, your sense of self. Thomas didn't give you any of that. You created it despite him, not because of him. Over the next 3 days, I immersed myself in work, meeting with clients during the day and planning for various contingencies at night. I didn't call or text Thomas, though he sent several messages ranging from apologetic to resentful. I forwarded them all to Alexandra without responding. On the 4th day, Alexandra called. He's reached out through his attorney. He wants to accept the settlement terms. Relief flooded through me. No contests, no demands. He's asking for a few modifications, keeping his car some family heirlooms from his side. Nothing substantial. He wants a private meeting to finalize details. I agreed to meet Thomas at Alexandra's office the following morning. He arrived looking haggard, as if he hadn't slept in days. Part of me, the part that had loved him for over 3 decades, ached at the sight. But the stronger part remembered the emails to Catherine, the identical promises he had broken, the years of life I had already spent rebuilding from his betrayal. For 2 hours we sat on opposite sides of Alexandra's conference table, dividing the artifacts of our shared life, like archaeologists cataloging a lost civilization. Wedding, China vacation. Photographs, holiday decorations, each item assigned a value and a destination. What about the house? Thomas asked, his voice hollow. Will you keep it? No, I said. It should be sold, the proceeds divided as outlined. He looked surprised. Where will you live? I've already arranged something. I saw no reason to tell him about the cottage on Whidbey Island. That was my new beginning untouched by our shared past. When the meeting concluded, Alexandra left us alone briefly to prepare the final documents. Thomas and I sat in uncomfortable silence until he finally spoke. "Is she worth it?" I asked suddenly. "Catherine, was she worth all this?" Thomas looked startled by the question. "No," he said after a moment. "Of course not. Was Melissa—" He flinched. "No." "Then why not just once but twice?" Thomas stared down at his hands, strong, capable hands that had once held mine with such tenderness. "I don't know," he said finally. "Maybe because it was easy. Maybe because I'm weak. Maybe because I convinced myself that what you didn't know wouldn't hurt you. But I did know," I said quietly both times. "Yes." He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "You're remarkable, Rebecca. You always have been. I just didn't appreciate it enough." "No," I agreed. "You didn't." When Alexandra returned with the documents, we signed them without further discussion. As we prepared to leave, Thomas paused at the door. "I am sorry," he said. "For everything I know, that doesn't change anything. But I need you to know." I looked at him, really looked at the man I had spent most of my life with, and felt a curious mixture of sadness and freedom. "I believe you're sorry, Thomas. I hope someday you understand why that's not enough." The divorce was finalized 3 months later without drama or public spectacle. True to my word, I didn't disparage Thomas to our children. Though I was honest. When they asked questions. Michael, now 33, and a university professor like his father had once been, was angry on my behalf. Sarah, 30, and a pediatrician with her father's empathetic side, was more forgiving but firmly supportive of my decision. "I always thought you two were the perfect couple," Sarah told me over dinner shortly after the divorce was final. Even after I found out about the first affair when I was in college, I nearly choked on my wine. "You knew about that?" Sarah nodded. "Michael told me. He overheard you and Dad fighting about it when he was a teenager. We never said anything because you seemed to work through it, and we didn't want to make things worse." I reached across the table for her hand. "I'm sorry you had to carry that knowledge." "Don't be sorry, Mom. Be proud. You showed us what resilience looks like, not just by forgiving Dad the first time, but by being strong enough to walk away when he broke your trust again." She squeezed my hand. "That's a powerful lesson." My move to Whidbey Island coincided with the start of summer. The cottage, with its panoramic water views and abundant natural light, became my sanctuary. I established a home office commuting to Seattle only 2 days a week for in-person client meetings. The rest of my time I spent gardening, walking the beach, reconnecting with old passions like photography and cooking that had been neglected in the busy years of career building and child raising. Thomas and I maintained minimal contact, coordinating only when necessary for family events. He had moved to a luxury apartment downtown, apparently dating again. Already, according to mutual friends. The news didn't hurt as I had expected it might. Instead, it reinforced my conviction that I had made the right choice. 6 months after the divorce, my business was thriving, my relationship with my children stronger than ever, and my new home becoming truly mine. I invited Sophia for a weekend visit, and we sat on my deck watching the sunset over the Sound, drinking Prosecco and talking about everything and nothing. "You know what's funny?" I said, watching a ferry glide across the water like a floating lantern. When I found out about the second affair, my first reaction wasn't pain, it was validation. Like, "See, I was right to prepare myself all these years." Sophia swirled her wine thoughtfully. "That's not funny, that's wisdom. You learned from experience instead of ignoring it." "But I wasted 20 years with a man who didn't deserve me," I pointed out. "Did you waste them, though?" Sophia challenged. "You raised 2 amazing kids. You built a successful business. You discovered your own strength. Would you have done any of that if you hadn't been pushed by his first betrayal?" Her question gave me pause. Would I have found the motivation to go back to school, start my own business, become financially independent if my comfortable life hadn't been shattered by Thomas's first affair? It was impossible to know for certain, but I suspected not. Complacency is a powerful force. Maybe not, I admitted. But that doesn't excuse what he did. Of course not, Sophia agreed. But it does mean you didn't waste those years, you used them. As dusk settled over the water, I considered her perspective. Perhaps the true failure would have been staying after the second betrayal, continuing to invest in someone who had proven beyond doubt that he couldn't be trusted with my heart. Instead, I had chosen myself, my future, my peace of mind. To not wasting another minute, I said, raising my glass. Sophia clinked hers against mine. To thriving, not just surviving. 18 months after the divorce, I encountered Thomas at our oldest nephew's wedding. He was with a date, not Catherine, but someone new. A woman about my age with a kind smile. I was alone by choice, enjoying my independence too much to complicate it with dating just yet. We exchanged polite greetings at the reception, navigating the awkwardness with practiced civility. "You look well, Becca," he said, his eyes taking in my simple but elegant dress, my relaxed posture, the highlights I'd recently added to my hair. "Thank you. So do you." It wasn't a lie. Thomas had always been handsome, and time had been kind to him. "I've been following your company's success in the business journals," he continued. "That major client in Asia, that's impressive." "It's been a good year," I acknowledged. "How's the engineering firm?" "I've actually taken early retirement," he said. "I'm doing some consulting, but mostly focusing on other interests." An awkward silence fell between us, the inevitable vacuum created when two people who once shared everything now have nothing safe to discuss. "I should get back to my table," I said finally. "It was nice seeing you, Thomas." As I turned to leave, he touched my arm lightly. "Rebecca." I paused, looking back at him. "I really am sorry for everything. I know I've said it before, but I mean it. You deserved better." I studied his face, the face I had woken up beside for 35 years, now familiar but distant, like a house I'd once lived in but no longer owned. "Yes," I said simply. "I did." Walking away, I felt no triumph, no vindication, no residual anger, just a quiet certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be, not defined by my marriage or its end, but by the choices I had made in response to circumstances beyond my control. Later that evening, I danced with my son, laughed with my daughter, chatted with old friends and family members. I was not Thomas Patterson's ex-wife, or the woman who got cheated on twice. I was simply Rebecca, successful businesswoman, loving mother, loyal friend, woman of strength and resilience. As I drove back to my cottage that night, the full moon illuminated Puget Sound, turning the water into a rippling sheet of silver. I thought about the parallel paths my life could have taken, staying with Thomas after the second betrayal, sacrificing my self-respect for the sake of comfort and familiarity. Or this path, the harder choice initially, but ultimately the one that led to peace. I thought about something my mother had told me when I was going through the divorce. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is start over. At 58, I had started over. Not from scratch. I carried with me the wisdom of experience, the love of my children, the success I had built, but with a clean slate emotionally. The betrayal that might have defined me had instead refined me, burning away the parts that were too willing to compromise, too eager to please, too afraid of standing alone. In their place was a woman. I was proud to be capable of forgiveness, but not endless excuses, able to love deeply, but not at the expense of self-respect, willing to take risks, but not foolish chances. The cottage windows glowed with welcoming light as I pulled into the driveway. Yummy. Not the home I had spent decades creating with Thomas, but something entirely mine. Something I had earned. Inside, I kicked off my heels, made a cup of herbal tea, and carried it out to the deck. The night was cool but not cold, the sky brilliant with stars. I wrapped a soft throw around my shoulders and settled into a lounger, listening to the gentle rhythm of waves against the shore. 20 years ago, devastated by Thomas's first betrayal, I had made myself a promise. If there was a next time, I would be prepared. I would not just survive, I would thrive. Looking at my life now, the successful business I had built, the beautiful home I had chosen, the inner peace I had cultivated, I knew I had kept that promise. Some might call it cynical to prepare for betrayal while rebuilding trust. I call it wisdom. Some might see my response to Thomas's second affair as cold or calculating. I see it as self-preservation. The moonlight gleamed on the water, and I smiled to myself. At last I understood the most important lesson of all. Forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. Trust once broken can be repaired. But the cracks remain a permanent reminder to stay vigilant, to value yourself, to create safeguards against future pain. I took a sip of tea, warm and comforting against the night air, and felt a profound gratitude wash over me, not for what had happened, but for how I had responded to it. For the woman I had become in spite of, or perhaps because of the challenges I had faced. Some stories don't have traditional happy endings. Some marriages don't last forever. Some betrayals can't be overcome. But that doesn't mean the story isn't worth telling. The marriage wasn't worth having. The healing isn't worth pursuing. My story continues. No longer defined by Thomas's choices, but by my own. And as I sat there under the vast sky, surrounded by the sound of waves and wind, I knew with absolute certainty that this moment, this life, this hard-won peace was exactly where I was meant to be.